Hello and welcome to Empower Our Futures Legislative Outlook Empower Hour. My name is Mary Pettigrew and I'm a member of the Empower Our Future communications team. Now I would like to do the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge with respect as non-native people that the land on which we stand, live, and learn is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. We also recognize the 48 contemporary tribal nations that are historically tied to the lands that make up the state of Colorado. We honor elders past, present, and future, and those who have stewarded this land throughout generations. We also recognize that our government, academic, and cultural institutions and our nation itself were founded upon and continue to enact exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples. May this acknowledgement demonstrate a commitment to working to dismantle ongoing legacies of settler colonialism, oppression, and inequities, and to recognize the hundreds of Indigenous nations who continue to resist, live, create, and uphold their sacred relations across their lands. Let us seek to understand what it means to be in right relationship today with the traditional stewards of this land and with this land itself and all the creatures that inhabit it. And let me go ahead and, introduce you properly here. Representative Judy Amabile. Thank you, Judy. She represents District 49, and that includes sections of the following counties: Boulder, Clear Creek, Gilpin, and Larimer. She chairs the Business Affairs and Labor Committee and the Legislative Oversight Committee concerning Colorado jail standards. Judy is also on the Appropriations, Legislative Council, and Judiciary Committees. Thank you again, Representative Amabile. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you. First of all, let me just say thank you to everybody who's here. I know that there are probably other things that might be more entertaining for you all to be doing, although maybe not, because I know you are a dedicated group of climate activists, and I really appreciate all of the things you've done for our state and for our country and really the world as we endeavor to be one of the leaders in this fight to address climate change and to get to a clean energy future. So thank you all for that. And thank you to Empower Hour for putting this on. I know how much work that is too. So I'm in my 4th year in the legislature, and I have been working on climate stuff and also on bills around climate resiliency and the effects of climate change, since we're already experiencing that every day in our lives. And this session, I am working on a bill with the governor's office, which is around taking the 2030 bill, the planning bill that said, hey, you got to get to 80% by 2030, and extending that out to 2040, and saying, hey, you've got to do a plan to get to 100% by 2040. And the bill does allow, if you have to get to 97, but if getting to 100 is cost prohibitive, then you don't have to get to 100, because that extra 3% might be so expensive that it isn't smart to do that. But it feels like we're on track to get there. And so we want to do this planning that makes sure that we get there. And then the other thing that I'd love to talk about is some of the things that are adjacent to energy. And that's things like the pollinator bill, which is coming up, and which I want to support to allow local control for pesticide management. And then the big thing is housing, because if we can get people to live nearer to where they work, to spend less time in their cars, then that will make a big difference if we reduce our emissions in the transit sector and in the housing sector. So I think you all know there's several housing bills coming. It's last year's big bill broken up into smaller parts. Some of it's already been run and passed. And the bill that I'm working on is the accessory dwelling unit bill. And that is going to be heard in committee next week. And I expect that we're going to get it out of committee and off to the Senate without too much trouble. We've been working really hard, stakeholding and making sure we have cities on board. Some cities, Boulder has just signed on as a supporter. We have some counties who are in support, and then a whole bunch of other advocacy organizations. But all of the housing bills kind of fit together and make a plan around having housing near transit and transportation opportunities. So that's the bulk of the stuff that I'm working on, and would love to answer questions on any of the other things. The legislature writ large is working on lots and lots of stuff. And I know you mentioned earlier the bill about phasing out fracking by 2030. And I'll certainly let other people speak to that, but theoretically, that is something I very much support. So look forward to seeing that move along. And I'll turn it over to, well, back to you, Mary, or to Senator Fenberg appears to have arrived.
Yes, thank you so much, Representative Amabile. And thank you, Senator Fenberg, for getting here. Steve Fenberg is Senate President and has represented Colorado Senate District 18 in Boulder since 2017. He's currently serving as President of the Senate and was Majority Leader from 2019 to 2022. He's chair of the Legislative Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Recovery Committee and vice chair of the Executive Committee of the Legislative Council, also vice chair of the Legislative Council Committee, and is a member of the Capitol Building Advisory Committee. Again, thank you so much, Senator Fenberg.
Well, thanks everybody for having us. Apologies for being late. I was finishing a meeting and couldn't get my Zoom open fast enough. You know, this is an interesting session because it's the second session of this General Assembly. So there's a few factors at play. One is, you know, it's an election year, and that always kind of makes everything a little bit screwy. But I would say I don't think the impact of the upcoming election is actually having is nearly as much of an impact on this legislative session as we've seen in the past. Part of that is because Democrats have healthy size majorities in both chambers. And I think there's just sort of like a confidence that comes with that. But I also think the other aspect is that because it's the second session in the General Assembly, there are a lot of ideas and thoughts and policies that were introduced maybe last year or even prior to that have been worked on, and we're seeing some of them come back or, you know, have 2.0 of the bill or iterations of it, either because it didn't pass or because it you know, folks want to take it farther or something like that. So, you know, the debates and the issues, because of that context, a lot of them are very similar to the debates and the issues that we were discussing last year. So, of course, I think Representative Amabile was mentioning the conversations around land use and growth, water, and obviously the impact of the ongoing drought, and questions around transportation, and you know, generally where we are in this moment in Colorado history, where we have grown and by all projections seem to continue to grow. And the question is how, and how do we do it in a way that's responsible and is taking into account our climate, our environment, the potential dangers of things like wildfires and different climate-induced events and things like that. So that's a big part of the conversation this year. Obviously, there's a lot of other tangential issues not tangential, but unrelated, maybe specifically to the environment, like education funding and things like that, that will be taking up a lot of our attention as well. In terms of specific climate and environmental issues, there will be some bills on oil and gas regulations that are coming. I have one that will be introduced hopefully shortly around forest pooling and mineral rights, an issue that's especially relevant, I think, for Boulder County and its history over the last few years when it comes to publicly owned minerals. And then several bills on ozone and air quality issues. We've passed actually several bills over the last several years, and of course, a lot of this happens in the regulatory side. But you know, we all know that we're still far outside of compliance with our air quality standards and requirements for the area. And then there will be several bills on not just sort of you know, talking about emissions and the horrible parts that come from the fossil fuel industry and our continuing reliance on fossil fuels, but there will be some exciting bills on actually advancing the renewable energy industry and getting us to transition faster. You know, one thing that I will talk about also is transportation sector. It's going to be a big topic this year. We passed a big bill a couple of years ago, Senate Bill 260. That really was about funding and about, you know, because of our fiscal constraints as a state, because of Tabor and other issues, we have been underfunding public infrastructure projects for a very long time. Senate Bill 260 is letting us catch up to peer states, but it didn't really allow us to sort of think big and think in a visionary sense of what is a transportation system that takes into account climate and emissions and how people live today. What does that look like? And so we're now finally able to have that conversation because we sort of got some of the backlog of investments that we should have made a long time ago out of the way. And a big part of that is big investments in a transit system that works for folks. So this means a lot more funding for things like mass transit and buses and rapid transit, bus rapid transit. And it also means finally getting things like our Front Range or our Northwest Rail off the ground, which is the part of Fast Tracks that we all have been paying for many years. And I think every couple of years, RTD tells us it's a few years out still. But we have an opportunity now, given the federal infrastructure bill and some other aspects that are happening here locally, to actually think big and do something visionary when it comes to mass transit, including rail, including more bus service that truly connects the state in a way that isn't going to be nearly as reliant on passenger vehicles, which I think is a huge part of our emissions problem and path forward in the Front Range, especially. So, you know, there are going to be some, like I said, renewable energy bills. I have one on modernizing the grid, on advancing community solar in a way that is much more accessible for folks. And I'm happy to answer questions on all of those areas or anything else that comes up in the discussion, but I'll leave it there for now.
Great. Thank you, Senator Fenberg. Next up, we have Representative Kyle Brown, who serves District 12 and parts of Boulder and Broomfield counties. He is a member of the Health and Human Services Committee and the State Civic, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee.
Thank you, Mary.
Sure.
It's really wonderful to be with all of you today and to talk to such, I always love talking with you all. I'm really excited about some of the work that we've got coming this session in terms of the sort of climate, really taking climate action. And in particular, I've got two bills that I'm working on, one with Senator Fenberg on the distribution system planning and making sure, as he mentioned, that we have a grid that is ready and able to handle all of the distributed sources of energy that will come with sort of decarbonizing, making sure that our electric vehicles and our solar panels all have a grid that they can plug into and that we can utilize, and that we have a workforce that is able to work on that grid, and that we're promoting that. So I'm very, very excited about that work. It's kind of I would say it's to some degree not the sexiest bill, but it is the essential infrastructure that allows us to make sure that we can transition to, a climate friendly energy economy, and one that's going to really take climate action seriously. So very excited to work on that. I'm also excited to be bringing a bill this year to encourage local governments to be in the business of taking climate action. Boulder, Louisville, Lafayette, many communities in our area have taken the lead in terms of sustainability planning, climate action plans, and we want to make sure that all communities in Colorado are doing their part. And so Representative Froelich and I are going to be bringing a bill to make sure that becomes a reality, because local action on these issues is really important. So with that, I'm really excited to work with my colleagues, Representative Joseph and what she's working on in the climate space, Representative Amabile, and as I mentioned, President Fenberg, supporting their work. It takes the legislature is the ultimate village, and it takes all of us to get a comprehensive package of policies across the finish line every year to keep moving us in the right direction. And so I'm excited to be a part of that again this year, and to continue to work with you all on ways that we can move our energy economy forward. So thanks very much for having me, Mary, and I look forward to hearing what your questions are.
Great. Thank you, Representative Brown. And now, last but not least, Representative Junie Joseph serves District 10 in Boulder. She is Vice Chair of the Finance Committee and a member of the Energy and Environment Committee. Go ahead, Junie, whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much. You've introduced me. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and thank you for the invite. So good evening, everyone. It is a delight to be here with all of you tonight to discuss environmental policies. And I want to start first by thanking Empower Our Future for the invite and the opportunity to be here with all of you. And it is because of the work of organizations such as Empower Our Future that we can hold certain organizations accountable and hold corporate polluters accountable. And again, thank you. My name is Junie Joseph. I'm a former Boulder City Council, current state representative. I've been a state rep for 2 years, and now I'm running for re-election. I am on the Child Welfare Interim Committee and also a co-chair of the Aerospace and Defense Caucus. I have 6 minutes, so I'm trying to fill in that 6 minutes. Let's talk about the environment. I have partnered with many of you on this Zoom today. Last year, I had 5 pieces of legislation. This year, as of right now, I have no environmental legislation, but I can talk a little bit about some of the bills that I've seen coming through. I have a couple in the pipeline, but being a legislator for 1 full year now, I know you don't want to talk about a bill that has not been introduced, because sometimes you talk about a bill and you're so excited about it, and after stakeholding or other things, the bill just doesn't get introduced. So that's part of one of the reasons today I'll be very careful not to talk too deeply about any bills that are potentially coming in the environmental space. So I don't want to, count my chickens before they hatch. Last year, I worked on 5 pieces of environmental legislation. One was on water conservation and oil and gas, electric options in home warranties, organic diversion study bill, wildfire evacuation and clearance time modeling, wildfire detection technology pilot program. So again, a lot of these bills, some of them are more environmental tangential bills. And then we passed last year one of the biggest bills in the nation, which you have heard about, which put the tax credit for EVs and e-bikes and different studies in the environmental space. And this year, again, as a member of the environmental committee, I'm watching some of the bills and some of them are excellent. Three bills that I wanted to mention to you that came through the Energy and Environment Committee, which I've voted for and support. There is a recycling of single-use electronic smoking device. That's a really interesting bill, and I know this would be an important bill to Boulder, and I voted to support this bill. So what it does, it really just establishes smoking device recycling strategies advisory group. So there would be a group that would eventually advise the state on how to dispose of these type of little smoking devices. So I think that was a really good bill. And I thought, why didn't I think about that myself? Another good bill, there is the local government authority to regulate pesticide. I think that's a really good bill. House Bill 1178, that's Rep. Kipp and Rep. Froelich. And I mean, there was some robust conversation in the Energy and Environment Committee on this bill. I think it's a great bill. It gives local government the authority to regulate pesticide, which we didn't have prior to this bill. Hopefully it goes straight to the governor's desk and it gets signed again. It's such an important bill. We talk about, you know, how do we protect community members? How do we ensure cleaner air? All these are part of the package. We need all the tools that we can have at our disposal. And then there is another bill, which is the electric vehicle charging system permits. So it expedites the process for permitting electric motor vehicle charging system. There has been work on this space already. There was some work on it last year, and we're doing more work in it this year. And then the potential two bills that I'm working on, one is expanding access to transit, and the other one is with CDPHE. I am excited to be a member of the Energy and Environment Committee this year. I really believe, aside from the Budget Committee, the Energy and Environment Committee is one of the best committee at the legislature, if I should say so myself, since I'm on it. I look forward to collaborating with my colleagues in E&E. And also, I want to hear from all of you on bills that are coming through the legislature. As you know, the Capitol is often buzzing with lobbyists who are telling us how to, you know, who are trying to sway us a lot and in the interest of who they represent. So it's very important to hear from you, from community. And I know you all are very active. You are here tonight. Just reach out anytime to me. And I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Representative Joseph. And we really appreciate everybody being mindful of the time. I am now pleased to introduce Steve Whitaker, a member of our communications team, and he will handle the questions from this point forward. Thank you, Steve.
Great, thank you, Mary. We have a number of questions, and they've been sent in advance of the actual event, and I've tried to consolidate them and organize them. Since we have quite a few of these questions, if you could be as concise as possible in your response, that would be appreciated, so that we're able to get to as many of them as possible. The first one is a question that's been consolidated from a number of questions of a similar nature, specifically asking President Fenberg about Senate Bill 159. And the question basically is, why did you assign Senate Bill 159 oil and gas permitting phase out to the Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee, where it faces a near certain death, as opposed to the Transportation and Energy Committee, where it would have stood a decent chance of getting out of committee? The sponsor specifically requested it go to Transportation and Energy This is the second year in a row that you have routed an oil and gas bill to a very unfriendly committee. President Fenberg, if you would respond.
Sure. There's a lot of things in that question. Trying to figure out exactly where to start. I mean, look, the legislative process is a little messy, has a lot of nuance, and there's a lot of things that maybe happen or occur that aren't always obvious from the outside looking in. Sometimes people introduce bills to pass them. Sometimes people introduce bills to make a statement. Sometimes sponsors tell groups that they made a certain request of me for bill assignment and they didn't actually. So I'm not really sure where to start with it, but it is the Ag and Natural Resources Committee is where virtually all oil and gas bills go. The only bill that I think didn't go there was was Senate Bill 181. But in my entire time at the Capitol, that is the committee that oil and gas bills go to in the Senate. If the bill was something that I thought was going to pass and that the sponsors frankly wanted it to pass, I think that would have been a different conversation. But my conversations that I had with the sponsors was that it was a messaging bill and they didn't intend to pass the bill. And sometimes when the bill gets introduced and the sponsor, tells the public a different story, it makes leadership look bad. And I'm okay with that. But all I'm saying is amongst, folks that I respect a lot and I've worked alongside for a long time, many of you on this call, the legislative process sometimes is a messy process, and sometimes people do things that maybe the intentions aren't always clear. But I guess what I would say is if there are multiple people with very similar question, then I would question where the narrative came from in the first place. But long story short, oil and gas bills almost always go to the Ag and Natural Resources Committee. The sponsors did not make a request on it going elsewhere this year. And in fact, the sponsors mentioned that it was a bill that they assumed wasn't going to pass and they didn't have the votes to pass it. And so there wasn't a whole lot of conversation after that point. I'm sure that's really unfortunate for a lot of folks to hear, but I also think it's important to be honest on legislation that's pending and sort of what its prospects are, rather than sort of sugarcoating it and making people think that something can pass or whatnot, when in reality maybe it can't. So that's what I would say. I'm happy to chat more offline or talk about details or even answer follow-up questions here on the call. But those are the thoughts that come to my head based on the nuance of and sort of character of the question that was asked.
Thank you, President Fenberg. As for other members of the panel, if you have established a position on oil and gas permitting phase out, if you'd like to speak to that at this point, it would be appreciated.
Well, I'll say a few things. I support that policy, absolutely. I realize that I may be in the minority in the legislature, but I think it's the right policy. It's particularly Eastern Boulder County, where I represent, has been kind of ground zero for some of these fracking conversations over the last 5-10 years. And we have really seen the conflict between people and the oil and gas industry, and it has emphasized to me the importance of protecting families and communities. So, but I recognize what the president was saying, which is that that is an uphill battle even still today in the legislature. But if that bill came before me, I would vote for it.
Yes, Representative Joseph.
Thank you. I would add the same as Representative Kyle Brown. I fully support phasing out oil and gas. And I have, attended a lot of stakeholding with 350 Colorado. And actually that bill, if it is the same bill that we're thinking, I was supposed to be one of the sponsors of the bill. That's another thing. It's like, again, as I mentioned to you, you can't talk about bills that you think you would be joining, because sometimes it just so happened that you were not one of the people who get chosen. But I was part of the conversation on that bill. I was part of the stakeholding meetings, and I fully support the bill. And if it somehow miraculously come out of ag in the Senate and it makes its way to the House, I will be in support of the bill.
Great, thank you, Representative Joseph. Yes, Representative Amabile.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I'll just say that it's hard to say I support something when you don't know what's in it. And of course, whatever bill may or may not come out of the Senate, we don't know what that would look like. But I will say that I generally support us phasing out fossil fuel use. And I think it's a worthwhile effort. And the devil, of course, is always in the details. And I also think we do have to make sure that we're covering all of our bases when we do that, because we're not generating enough electricity from renewables just yet to cover what might potentially be lost. And I understand the bill is just about permitting and not about ongoing drilling, but all of that has to be carefully thought through. And so, yeah, theoretically, I think absolutely. I don't think there's a person a Democrat in Colorado who doesn't support that. But it is really about what is in the actual language of the bill and what are the impacts. So thanks.
Great, thank you, Representative Amabile. We'll move on to the next question. Communities that were served by Xcel as wholesale customers that have been able to go shopping for their electric provider, for example, Yampa Valley Electric near Steamboat, Grand Valley Electric near Grand Junction, Holy Cross Energy in the Aspen Glenwood Springs area, and Core Co-op south of Denver, have all been able to get much better deals and much better customer service from their new providers. Who among you would support a community choice CCE system that would allow communities in IOU territories to go to market for their electric provider, even if Governor Polis wants to defend Xcel's monopoly with a veto? What will you do to help change Governor Polis's mind? Who would like to respond?
I'll go ahead and start, and I'm sure Representative Amabile will want to chime in too, and others. But that was an issue that Representative Amabile worked on over the summer. It's something that I support the idea, like, our community wants choice, right? Our community wants to be able to go and find alternatives to Xcel. And what we found, it's not just Governor Polis that doesn't like it, and his energy office. It's also the labor unions, the solar industry, the obviously Xcel, and the other utilities. Not surprisingly, we struggled with that. There was even the environmental groups were pretty lukewarm on it. So there was no path for a bill like that this year. We even wrote the bill. It was, what was it, Judy, like 80 pages or something like that. So we tried, but there was no reason to bring a bill that was going to die in its first committee. So but we'll keep working on it, right? I believe in this issue, and I believe that our community deserves a choice. And I do think that there's not only ways that we can continue to push the envelope as local communities, which is part of the reason why I'm bringing my local community bill later this year. But it's hard. The politics around this are hard, and it's not just from the governor. So
Yeah, let me just, we did work on it all summer, and Senator Fenberg was right there with us, helping us, and you know, making sure that we understood. And yes, there was resistance from the governor's office, but it wasn't like, I don't like this idea. I believe the governor believes in competition, and that particular part of this policy, I don't think they had any problem with it. What the fear is that somehow by doing that, we throw off our current path to renewables, which we're moving along very quickly. And Excel is doing a pretty good job of supporting that and moving in that direction. So the fear among the governor's office and some of the environmental groups was that this policy, which is a very sweeping change, could actually cost us in our move to more renewables. And so at the end of the day, what we ended up talking about with a lot of the advocates was, how do we make sure that Excel is passing along low costs? Because right now they appear to be getting excessive profits off of this switch to renewables. And so, we committed, Rep. Brown and I, to continuing to work on that, and to continue to work on what is competition due to cost. And so we're going to continue to work on that. I personally am not in one to bring a bill that I know has no chance of passing. I'm not a statement bill person. So I know some people, I understand why people want to do that, but I have maybe less time in life than a lot of other people, and I want to spend it on bills that I think have a chance of passing.
Great, thank you, Representative Amabile. Would any of the other panelists like to comment? Yes, Representative Joseph.
Okay, thank you. I fully support community choice energy. I've had some conversation as well. Even before I became a state representative, I've had conversations with members of our community here in Boulder, and I know that's a priority for them, because again, it's very hard to put our trust in a monopoly. We want to give community members choice, and we understand that, yes, we're making strides when it comes to renewable energy, but we want to move faster. How do we do that? Choice is part of that conversation. And I also want to acknowledge that what I heard here today has been part of the conversation. Everything that I've heard when it comes to the challenges, but nonetheless, I still believe that we have to keep pushing. We have to keep pushing forward. And I think part of the challenges as well of what I heard today is that we all have 5 bills. Sometimes it's very difficult to put, one of those bills toward just a conversation piece, but also that require us to have the courage to do it, because we never know. Because last year I had one bill that I thought, I will not tell you which one, that I thought was a conversation piece, but it ended up being, it made it through to the governor's desk, and it did pass. So that's still part of the conversation. Hey, maybe let's bring it forward and have it be part of the conversation, but who knows that ultimately people might actually, through negotiation, it might happen. So, and I commit to be a partner with, the members here who wants to bring this bill forward next year and continue to support it. And as well, I've heard there's a lot of things to work out on this bill. And that's where you all come in as attendees. And a lot of you, I've seen some of the names on here, you all are expert in this field. And part of your work as well will be to help educate members of the legislature, because that's part of the uphill battle. Because yes, we can introduce this bill, but we also have to convince our other colleagues to vote for the bill. And sometimes us alone is not enough. We need you as the expert to go in and talk to our other colleagues and let them know, hey, here's why this bill is important and here's why it is important for your community. And also some of the challenges, my understanding, because of the boundaries of cities and districts when it comes to the way communities buy electricity, that's also part of the challenges. So for you who are expert in this field, we want to know how to overcome these challenges. So you have to also be at the table with us. But I will continue to champion and support CCE. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Representative Joseph. Any further comments on this particular yes, President Fenberg.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I'll just be quick. I mean, I support the bill and the issue. And, you know, I think at the end of the day, community choice around energy, their energy future is core to a community being able to, you know, establish its own destiny and, you know, what they're going to be. I think energy is so core. Obviously, many of us lived through the big fights in Boulder. And I think that informs a lot of my thinking on this and a lot of work that I've done since. So wholeheartedly support it, but I also, you know, I think the reality is, and I think Representative Amabile is right. The enemy or the opposition to this is it's not the governor. It's not Excel even necessarily, because of course Excel opposes it, but that's not the reason why we can't get it done right now. I think it is because there are a lot of interests, good or bad, that are reliant on the existing system. And it's really hard to get those interests to get on board with a disruption when it will be disruptive to their interests, and at least in the short term, right? So that's labor. And if labor is opposed to a bill, there's a segment of the Democratic caucuses that will just automatically be no questions asked. They will not even entertain the conversation. And then you're just dead in a committee. But like Rep. Brown said, there's also, you know, our friends on the energy side at times, which on the development side, at the end of the day, those are businesses, right? And they have contracts and they have interests that might not be about structural public policy change, but more about just getting to the next quarter and investments and shareholders and things like that. And it's a big challenge and it's incredibly frustrating. But that's the reality at the moment. But I obviously support it, just like the other folks on this call.
Great. Thank you, President Fenberg. The next question. As you know, running electric wires underground decreases outages, thus improving reliability. Fort Collins has undergrounded well over 90% of its lines and has some of the highest reliability in the country. Our monopoly electric utility collects funds for undergrounding from its customers. During the 10 years that Boulder did not have a franchise contract with Excel, the utility continued to collect these funds from us, but did not do any undergrounding in Boulder. Would you support legislation to give communities the right to have those collected funds spent in their communities on undergrounding, whether they are in franchise or not? And would you support legislation to enable communities or service territories to direct these collected funds to be invested in reliability and resilience in ways other than undergrounding? Who would like to respond first?
I'll just respond quickly. Without knowing all the details, I'm pretty sure I would support that. I've looked into the undergrounding stuff in the past. And yeah, I don't think a monopoly utility should be able to use that as a threat to keep communities in franchise. So absolutely. And I think if there are more innovative ways to spend that money than just simply undergrounding in a community, then I think that should be, by all means, something that a community should be able to decide for itself if it wants to.
Great, thank you, President Fenberg.
I have a giant transformer right outside blocking my view of the Flatirons. So I'm all about undergrounding. I'm
This
just
is
kind of.
big. This is a big issue in Louisville and in some of our historic neighborhoods too, because it's, you know, it's, we really need to get those lines undergrounded. And yeah, that's all I got. I can't beat Judy's comment. Sorry. Yeah. I'm for undergrounding. Okay, there.
I think
Any-
maybe, oh,
Go
go
right
ahead.
ahead. Representative Joseph, go right ahead.
Thank you. I am not an expert in this space either, but I think part of the conversation, or at least what I heard, is that funds are being collected and the undergrounding is not being provided in certain communities. Can that money, or should it be redirected toward reliability and resilience and other projects other than undergrounding? And my answer is yes, wholeheartedly. And I would support such legislation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Representative Joseph. The next question. If Coloradans use electricity during the day when the sun is shining, there is a good chance of using cleaner electricity powered by solar energy. Xcel is a pioneer in using wind forecasting to predict wind turbine power generation. They use nighttime wind forecasts to guide how much fossil gas to buy to provide electricity when the wind isn't blowing. Xcel's energy charging perks pilot program uses this forecast to inform a small group of electric vehicle owners when to charge up to increase the use of renewable energy. Would you support legislation to provide this already available forecasted information to all of Xcel's customers so that businesses and individuals could choose times when electricity is cleanest for their discretionary use, such as when to run high energy appliances and choosing which nights to charge EVs or other equipment? Who would like to respond?
That seems reasonable to me. I mean, I'd have to see what the bill looked like, but I'd like, that seems, that kind of a principle of being able to choose or even be rewarded for charging your car or utilizing electricity at times when the most renewable power is on the grid. I think that makes a ton of sense to me. So, you know, I always like to find innovative ways that we can change the incentives around our energy use. You know, I mean, just simply, right, like one of the things that we're excited about in my home is like even just the peak usage, like knowing Xcel tells us like, we're going to pay more during certain times of the day than others. That changes our behavior, right? I run my dishwasher in the middle of the night. So if someone were telling me, you know, by the way, you should be charging your car or running your dishwasher during these times instead of these other times, so you can maximize renewable energy, I would take that up in a heartbeat. So.
Thank you, Representative Brown. Representative Joseph.
Thank you. I agree. I think maybe part of the conversation as well, and I would appreciate maybe the person who asked this question to have further conversation outside of here, because part of it as well is who's providing that information. Is it Xcel? Would they be willing to provide that information, right? Because we're asking for forecasting information. So are we legislating around that? And what would that look like? Would Xcel be a willing participant as part of this conversation, or would we just legislate around it? But ultimately, I think it's a great idea that for all the reason that Rep. Brown says, right? If we want people to have information on when to best use energy to, right, to when should you, certain type of appliances, when should you charge them, or when should you charge your car? Having that information is is power. It helps us as well as a community because we're trying to get to renewable, we want to use renewable energy. And again, we don't want to load the grid. So we have to think about how do we balance? So I think that's an important conversation, but again, who's providing that information? Is it Excel? And will Excel be a willing participant as part of that conversation? Or do we have to bring them to the table to force them as part of it? So I think that to me, that sounds like a very interesting bill, and I'd love to have that continued conversation with you. And if I'm missing the mark in my response, I'd love to hear more. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Joseph. Any additional comments?
Yeah, I support it. I think at a bare minimum, right? I mean, you can actually take that several steps farther and incentivize not just when you use energy, but when you discharge energy from your car battery or from your battery in your house and things like that. And we've made baby steps on that, I would say. The problem is, the big utilities, especially the investor-owned utilities, have no real incentive to truly roll this out en masse, because they will look at every decision based on, does this allow me to build more stuff and buy more things, or does this result in a more efficient use of the product that I provide consumers? And they'll usually err on the side of building more things, right? So we have to force it either through the PUC or through statute. We do the bill that Representative Brown mentioned that we're working on together will include statutory direction on virtual power plants and things like that. I mean, so much of it's so frustrating because although like our tech and the world is advancing so fast, right? If you think about AI, it's like no one knew what that was 2 years ago, basically. And now every couple of weeks, there's a huge advancement. Yet we're still basically using technology from, 100 years ago for our electric grid, even though it's like part of the existential crisis we're facing. And a lot of the problems, a lot of the use of our grid could just be improved so much by simply using better software and just thinking about when we use energy, how we use it, et cetera. But again, that's in our interest, not necessarily the investor-owned utility that wants to just buy more stuff and build more things.
Thank you, President Fenberg. Any additional comments on this topic?
I won't belabor it. It sounds like it's a good idea. It's good policy. I mean, I sat next to a guy on an airplane who worked for NREL like 20 years ago, and he was talking about this. So it's probably high time we act on it.
Great. Thank you, Representative Amabile. So the next question is, our air quality is terrible, and oil and gas operations play a significant role with the release of volatile organic chemicals, etc. What will you do to help improve our air quality?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things that we need to do to address air quality. We have to work on our transportation, the highways and all the cars. And then we have to do a better job of regulating Suncor and other entities like that. And we have to give CDPHE more teeth or something. We have to fix what's gone wrong there and why they're not responding better. And I think we've gotten some good help from EPA, but the state of Colorado has to take action. And there have been a lot of bills, and they meet with a lot of resistance. But at some point, enough is enough, and especially for marginalized communities that are really feeling the impacts. We have to address that.
Thank you, Representative Amabile. Any further comments on this? Representative Joseph.
Yes, thank you. That's a big question. It's everything that's been mentioned, from regulating cars to also regulating cars, transportation, and also rulemaking around ozone. And it's a big question. I think for me, what I can do at this time, because I don't have any bills in this space, is to continue to support all the bills that are coming through the legislature and offer my full support. And actually, I think one of those big bills that was mentioned that's going to ag was part of that conversation as well, that I was part of early on prior to the start of session. Again, we just talked about, permitting, right? Getting rid of oil and gas permitting. Again, that's also part of that conversation. So it's a big issue. And again, what I can do at this time is just continue to support bills that are coming through the legislature.
Great. Thank you, Representative Joseph, and to all our panelists. Thank you. We are approaching the end of the Empower Hour. I will return this to Mary.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you so much, legislators, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time and attention to these matters, and hearing you sound so informed about the issues is really gratifying. I'm going to just take a moment and thank other members of the Empower Our Future communication team. All of these folks are integral to making these Empower Hours happen. They are Steve Whitaker, Paul Cullen, Chris Hoffman, and Julie Zonizer. I'm going to sign off for tonight. Thank you so much.